A 70-year-old man sits in an Athenian jail cell. His legs have just been unshackled. His friends surround him, weeping. He has hours to live. And then, for the first and only time in any record we have, he laughs. Not bitterly, not nervously. He laughs because his grieving friends, who have spent years professing belief in the immortality of the soul, are now asking him how he'd like to be buried. He points out the absurdity. You can do whatever you like with the body. That's not Socrates. Socrates is going to the gods. This is the death of Socrates, the most famous execution in the history of philosophy. But Plato didn't write it up as a simple historical account. He designed it as something far more ambitious, a new art form meant to replace Greek tragedy itself. To understand that laughter, we need to go back to the courtroom and to the layers of hypocrisy, irony, and the political manipulation that brought Socrates to that cell. Socrates was tried in 399 BCE, 4 years after Athens' catastrophic defeat in the Peloponnesian War. That war lasted nearly 3 decades, from 431 to 404, pitting Athens against Sparta for control of the Greek world. It ended with Athens humiliated, its empire dissolved, its fleet destroyed, its long walls torn down to the music of flute girls while Spartan generals watched. The turning point had been the Sicilian Expedition of 415 to 413 BCE, a disastrous military adventure that destroyed Athens' best forces and its confidence. In the chaos that followed defeat, a brutal oligarchy called the 30 Tyrants seized power in Athens, executing and exiling hundreds of citizens. Democracy was restored in 403 BCE, but the city was traumatized, consumed by blame, and searching for someone to hold responsible. In this volatile atmosphere, Athens enacted something called the Law of Oblivion, a formal prohibition against prosecuting anyone for offenses committed before the restoration of democracy. The amnesty was designed to prevent civil war by drawing a line under the past. But it had a crucial unintended consequence for philosophy. The people who wanted Socrates dead could not charge him with what they actually held against him. The real grievance was political. Alcibiades, the brilliant, reckless Athenian politician, had urged Athens into the catastrophic Sicilian Expedition, one of the worst military disasters in the city's history. When things went wrong, Alcibiades defected first to Sparta, then to Persia, betraying Athens' military secrets along the way. He was one of Socrates' most famous students and closest companions. Another associate, Charmides, had connections to the oligarchy of the 30 Tyrants. Many Athenians held the philosopher personally responsible. The teacher, they reasoned, must have corrupted the student. But the Law of Oblivion blocked direct prosecution of these associations. So Socrates' accusers, Meletus, Anytus, and the Lycon, fabricated different charges. The formal indictment read, corrupting the youth and impiety toward the gods of Athens. In the ancient world, politics and religion were inseparable. There was no concept of separation of church and state. Rejecting the gods of the city was tantamount to treason. Everyone in the courtroom, accusers and audience alike, understood the real stakes. The entire proceeding was layered with institutional hypocrisy. The trial was rigged from the start. But Plato's genius lies in showing that the irony runs even deeper than political corruption. In the Apology, Plato's account of Socrates' defense speech, the central dramatic irony is devastating. The Athenian people, the ones bringing charges, were themselves the true corruptors of youth and the truly impious citizens. Socrates, the condemned man, was in fact the most pious person in Athens and the one who had done the most to genuinely educate the young. Athens accused Socrates of being precisely what he was, and will execute him for its own failings. Socrates opens his defense with characteristic irony. He remarks that his accusers spoke so persuasively he nearly believed them himself, except that almost nothing they said was true. He asked the jury for an impartial hearing, but recognizes how unlikely this is. The Athenian public has been systematically miseducated, not by Socrates, but by poets, sophists, and politicians who have spent decades shaping opinion without regard for truth. Socrates singles out one poet in particular, Aristophanes, whose comedy The Cloud subjected Socrates to sustained public ridicule. The play portrayed him as a charlatan running a phony school. A man who teaches people to make weaker arguments defeats stronger ones. For ordinary Athenians who had never met Socrates, this comic portrait was their primary source of information. A sophist, a paid teacher of rhetoric and persuasion with no commitment to truth, was precisely what Aristophanes made Socrates look like. The result, most Athenians could not distinguish Socrates from the sophists, the very people who had actually been corrupting Athenian youth. This poetic miseducation is one reason Plato later argued in the Republic that poets should be censored in the ideal state. Socrates emphasizes a key distinction. Unlike the sophists, he has never accepted payment for his teaching. He is 70 years old, appearing in a law court for the first time in his life, having always been a law-abiding private citizen. Socrates then shifts from speech-making to cross-examination, questioning Meletus, the chief accuser. Meletus was not a particularly capable thinker. The other two accusers stayed in the background to avoid entanglement with the Law of Oblivion. Within a matter of lines, Socrates demolishes the charges. When Meletus asserts Socrates is a complete atheist, Socrates asks a simple question: does he not believe in daimonia, spiritual beings, or demigods? Meletus concedes that Socrates appears to believe in such things. Socrates delivers the devastating analogy: does anyone believe in foals but not horses, in kids but not goats? If demigods exist, they can only be the offspring of gods. Believing in demigods while denying gods is like believing in mules while denying horses and donkeys. The charge of atheism collapses in moments. The deeper problem with the prosecution's case: had the accusers been more precise, charging heterodox religious views rather than outright atheism, they might have built a more credible case. Instead, they bundled vague claims that were the exact opposite of the truth. Having demolished Meletus, Socrates dismisses him and returns to speech-making. In Plato's writing, this shift is significant. When Socrates abandons dialectical back and forth for continuous speech, it signals a breakdown in genuine communication. Here, because the prosecution is fundamentally insincere. Having exposed the prosecution's incoherence, Socrates turns to the real story, the one that explains why he lived the way he did. His friend Chaerephon once visited the oracle at Delphi and asked whether anyone was wiser than Socrates. The oracle answered, "No one." Socrates professes astonishment. As a pious man who trusts the oracle, he cannot dismiss the answer, yet he is certain he possesses no special knowledge, so he undertakes a systematic investigation, questioning everyone in Athens reputed to be wise. He goes to the politicians first. They hold confident opinions on every subject but cannot withstand basic questioning. They mistake opinion for knowledge. He goes to the poets. They produce beautiful work but cannot explain their own creations. They compose by inspiration, not understanding. They mistake aesthetic talent for comprehensive wisdom. He goes to the craftsmen. They possess genuine technical expertise in their trades, but assume this qualifies them to pronounce on matters far beyond their competence. In every case, Socrates discovers the same pattern: people who believe they know things they do not know. Socrates alone has reached the bedrock of his own ignorance, and so the oracle proved correct. The wisest person is the one who recognizes the limits of his own understanding. This is the core of Socratic irony, wisdom as the knowledge of one's own ignorance. Socrates conducts this philosophical mission in obedience to the god. His daimonion, his divine inner voice, a kind of spiritual sign that has guided him since childhood, commands him never to abandon philosophy. He declares he will not accept acquittal if the price is ceasing to philosophize. This is perhaps the most defiant moment in the apology. The city can kill him, but it cannot make him betray his calling. His entire life has been devoted to improving his fellow citizens by making them recognize their ignorance, by forcing them to examine the assumptions they have never questioned. For Socrates, piety consists not of ritual observance, but of service to the god through the improvement of humanity. And the jury has already made up its mind. What follows is one of the most extraordinary sequences in Western literature. Socrates refuses to appeal to the jury's emotions. He will not bring out his wife and children to weep and beg for mercy. He is not pathetic. He is not guilty. And that is the only honest basis for acquittal. Here lies the fundamental distinction between Socrates and a sophist. A sophist says what he thinks others will believe, regardless of whether he believes it himself. Socrates says what he believes, regardless of whether anyone else will accept it. The jury convicts him. Under Athenian law, the defendant may propose an alternative to the death penalty demanded by the prosecution. Socrates, with characteristic audacity, suggests free maintenance at public expense in the Prytaneum, the city center, an honor reserved for Olympic victors who have brought Athens its greatest glory. The logic is consistent. If he has spent his life improving the citizens of Athens, he deserves the city's highest recognition. The choice, as he frames it, is stark. Either kill him or grant him Athens' supreme civic honor. Under pressure from friends, he offers a fine of 1 mina, a trivially small amount, while his companions volunteer to raise 30 minae. The gesture underscores his persistent insistence on innocence and his refusal to dignify a corrupt process. After the death sentence is confirmed, Socrates delivers 2 remarkable speeches to separate audiences. To those who convicted him, he pronounces a kind of curse. Blood guilt will fall upon them. Natural justice will eventually pursue them. He will be dead, but they will be remembered in history as the people who killed Socrates. The language echoes Aeschylus's Oresteia, the great tragic trilogy about the Furies who pursue those who shed innocent blood. Catharsis, the term Aristotle later used for the emotional purification produced by the highest tragedy through pity and fear, is precisely what Plato achieves here. An innocent and superior man, one without any tragic flaw, will die because of the incompetence, foolishness, and immorality of those who judged him. Hamartia, the fatal flaw that undoes the heroes of classical tragedy, is entirely absent in Socrates. In traditional tragedy, the hero falls because of his own deficiency. Oedipus is destroyed by his pride, Agamemnon by his hubris. But Socrates has no such flaw. His downfall is caused entirely by the moral failures of others. Plato structures the apology to mirror and surpass the Aristotelian tragic framework. Same pity, same fear, same catharsis, but a hero who is wholly innocent, making the audience not the protagonist, the source of the tragedy. To those who voted for acquittal, Socrates speaks warmly. He calls them true gentlemen and friends. He tells them not to fear for him or pity him. He expects to go to the gods and to a better place. Every person must eventually take this journey, and the philosopher is the one who has studied how to die. Having an orderly soul, the inner virtue that philosophical knowledge cultivates, allows a person to face ultimate questions without terror. True courage consists not in fearlessness, but in fearing the right things. Socrates fears not death, but doing what he knows to be wrong. These twin speeches produce the catharsis of pity and fear that defines the highest art. But Plato is doing more than telling Socrates' story. His ambition is to supplant the entire tradition of Greek tragedy, epic, and comedy with a new hybrid art form, the philosophical dialogue. This new form conveys moral knowledge rather than the moral confusion Plato attributes to the poets. The Socratic hero replaces the Homeric hero of violent action and the tragic hero undone by a fatal flaw. Socrates represents a new literary ideal, the hero of knowledge and philosophy, whose excellence lies in learning and teaching rather than warfare or doomed grandeur. Plato is not simply writing about Socrates, he is inventing a new kind of literature. The scene shifts. It is the day before execution. A religious mission, a sacred ship sent to Delos, has delayed the sentence for approximately a month. No executions are permitted while the ship is at sea. Socrates' friend Crito arrives at the prison early in the morning and finds him sleeping peacefully, a condemned man hours from death resting in perfect contentment. When Socrates wakes, Crito says he did not want to disturb such peaceful sleep. Socrates replies that his conscience is clear. Then he describes a dream. A woman in white robes appeared and told him, "On the third day you will reach pleasant and good Phthia." The allusion is to Homer's Iliad. Achilles, the greatest of the Greek warriors, nursing his wrath against Agamemnon and refusing all bribes to rejoin the fight, declares that in 3 days he will sail home to his native Phthia. Socrates is the new Achilles. But the profound irony, Achilles threatens to leave. Socrates completes his hero's journey by remaining exactly where he is, refusing to flee. Crito urges escape. He can bribe the jailer. They can flee to Sicily. Socrates refuses, insisting the question must be examined through reason, not emotion. Crito is generous and well-intentioned, but his reasoning extends no further than concern about what people will think, that his friends failed to save him. Through careful dialectical exchange, Socrates establishes a binding principle. By choosing to remain in Athens his entire life, leaving only for military service, he has implicitly entered a contract with the city to respect its laws. He has benefited from those laws his entire life. They educated him, protected him, gave him the freedom to philosophize. Having accepted these benefits for 70 years without objection, he cannot now reject the city's authority simply because the outcome is unfavorable. He has an obligation to obey even unjust laws applied unjustly. The escape would not be Socrates acting as himself. It would be Socrates acting as the kind of person his accusers claimed he was, someone who places himself above the law when it suits him. The Crito serves as a necessary counterbalance to the Apology. In the Apology, Socrates declares he will never stop philosophizing regardless of what any law commands, a stance of radical individual conscience that, taken as a universal principle, could justify anarchic defiance of all legal authority. The Crito tempers this by affirming the claims of law and implicit civic obligation. Plato recognizes the dangerous potential of individual conscience elevated above all else without qualification. The two dialogues together present a complex portrait, a man who insists on the supremacy of philosophical inquiry, yet acknowledges the binding force of the legal and political order within which that inquiry takes place. Neither dialogue alone gives the full picture. Plato needs both, the radical independence of the Apology and the civic submission of the Crito, to capture the truth about Socrates and the philosophical life. The Crito resolves the question of law, but the deepest question remains, the one that hangs over everything, the fate of the soul after death. The Phaedo is Plato's answer. It is a middle period dialogue of considerable philosophical depth, narrated by Phaedo, a Pythagorean. The Pythagoreans were a quasi-religious, quasi-mathematical brotherhood who lived in monastic-style communities, united by the conviction that mathematics provides a bridge to the divine. Phaedo, Simmias, and Cebes, those present at Socrates' death, share the Pythagorean assumption that the soul is immortal and undergoes reincarnation, but they seek firmer rational grounds for this belief. The dialogue opens with Socrates being unshackled. He rubs his legs and remarks on how strangely relief from pain produces pleasure, how closely bound they are to sensation and the body. This unshackling is poetic foreshadowing. Just as chains are removed from the body, the soul will soon be separated from the body itself. Those present report feeling a simultaneous desire to laugh and cry. The interweaving of comedy and the tragedy that marks this dialogue as unique. Socrates states directly, philosophy prepares a person to die. The philosopher practices death throughout life by separating the soul's attention from dependence on the body and bodily pleasure. Simmias and Cebes press him. How can he face death without fear? Socrates responds with several arguments, offered in the spirit of inquiry rather than dogma. First, the argument from opposites. Greek physics recognized that opposites alternate. Hot comes from cold, light from dark, waking from sleep. If life and death alternate in the same fashion, one might expect the soul to oscillate between the two states. Second, the simplicity of the soul. The soul is not composite but elemental. It is a simple unity. Simple non-composite things are least subject to dissolution or destruction. Third, the theory of recollection. All knowledge is recollection from a prior existence, as Socrates argued in the Manual. If the soul possessed knowledge before birth, it existed before birth, and what existed before birth may well persist after death. The counter-arguments are formidable. Simmias offers the lyre analogy. The soul might be like the harmony of a tuned lyre, something real, distinct from the physical instrument, yet destroyed when the lyre is broken. This draws on Hippocratic medical theory, which conceived of health as a harmony of bodily elements. If the soul is merely a harmony of the body's parts, it perishes with the body. Cebes raises a different objection. Even if the soul survives several deaths through reincarnation, this does not prove it endures forever. Perhaps it eventually exhausts itself, like a person who wears out several sets of clothing, but in the end still dies. Socrates concedes honestly. His responses to these objections remain suggestive rather than demonstrative. He urges his companions to continue the inquiry after his death. Inquiry did not begin with Socrates and will not end with him. Socrates expresses certainty he will join the immortal gods, and hope, with somewhat less confidence, that he will encounter virtuous souls as companions of the divine. He describes the road to Hades as convoluted, contrasted with the straight road to the gods, the straight and narrow path he has tried to follow throughout his life. His entire existence has been a new kind of odyssey, not a physical voyage across strange lands, but a spiritual journey conducted within the walls of a single city. Where Odysseus encounters monsters and enchantresses in far-flung places, the challenges came to Socrates exactly where he stood, in the agora, in the gymnasium, at dinner parties. His odyssey was internal, Pythagorean, and spiritual rather than geographical. After drinking hemlock, Socrates must walk around until his legs grow heavy. This walking completes the journey motif. As his legs fail, the body falls away, and the great separation of body and soul commences. And this brings us back to that jail cell, to the laughter. At Stephanus 115c in the Phaedo, just after the hemlock has been mixed, Crito asks Socrates how they should bury him. Everyone is weeping, and Socrates laughs. The only time he laughs in all of Plato's dialogues. He has spent hours arguing for the immortality of the soul. His friends, who profess to believe him, are now fretting about the disposal of his corpse. He tells them gently, I cannot persuade Crito that Socrates is the one who is now conversing and ordering the arguments. He thinks I am the body he will see lying before him shortly, and he asks how he should bury me. Do whatever you wish with what remains. The body is a husk. The soul cannot be buried. The last words Plato attributes to Socrates are a request to sacrifice a rooster to Asclepius, the god of healing, as if death were recovery from the illness of embodied life. This laughter is the philosophical climax of the entire sequence. When genuine knowledge is achieved, when a person has truly examined life and attended the soul, mortality ceases to be tragic. It becomes divine comedy. the laughter that comes from seeing human existence from the perspective of the gods. Consider the contrast with the other great spiritual teacher of the Western tradition. In the Gospels, Jesus never laughs. His concession to humanity takes the form of weeping at Lazarus' tomb over Jerusalem's fate. For Jesus, human life is characterized by sorrow driven by emotions that impel people towards sin. Life is a veil of tears, and the proper response is compassion expressed through shared grief. Socrates makes the opposite concession. His response to the human condition is laughter. Human life, in his view, is conducted within a veil of illusion, opinion mistaken for knowledge, fear of what need not be feared, attachment to what cannot last. When the veil is pierced, what emerges is not tragedy but comedy. Plato's Laws captures this perspective with remarkable precision. There is nothing especially serious about human life, yet the pity is that human beings are nonetheless required to take some part of it seriously. Socrates can be understood as a kind of joke played upon humanity by the gods, a brief glimpse into the god's eye view of human affairs. His comedy is not the vulgar comedy of Aristophanes, where characters are ridiculous because they lack self-knowledge. Socrates is funny because everyone around him is ridiculous. He is a cosmic comic hero who reveals human absurdities through his superiority to the illusions that grip ordinary mortals. Plato uses the Phaedo to gesture toward eternity and confront the fundamental human enigma, how to face both life and death with philosophical composure. Socrates is a quasi-divine figure, a man with an inner divine sign guiding his conduct, a man the oracle itself identified as the wisest in Athens. Ordinary human beings cannot fully imitate him, but they can approach his example, drawing ever closer through the cultivation of spiritual depth, wisdom, and sustained inquiry. The immortality of the soul cannot be definitively proven within the dialogue. Socrates himself acknowledges this. He urges his friends to continue the inquiry after he is gone. But his conduct in the face of death demonstrates something that arguments alone cannot establish. If death is not truly dangerous to the person who has tended the soul, then nothing in life need be genuinely daunting. This is not a theoretical claim. It is demonstrated through action, through the calm sleep the night before execution, through the patient dialectical exchange while the hemlock waits, through the laughter at his friend's confusion, through the steady walking as his legs grow heavy. The examined life, the life of continuous inquiry, self-perfection, and the pursuit of knowledge and virtue, is Socrates' enduring legacy, not as a doctrine to be memorized, but as a practice to be embodied. In such a life, the journey of inquiry matters far more than any final destination. The questions matter more than the answers. The willingness to recognize ignorance matters more than the pretense of certainty. Plato watched the most just man he knew destroyed by a democratic jury inflamed by poets, sophists, and political grudges. His response was not merely grief. It was the invention of an entirely new art form, the philosophical dialogue, designed to do what tragedy, comedy, and epic could not, produce genuine moral knowledge rather than moral confusion. The tragic hero falls from his own flaw. The comic character stumbles through ignorance. The epic hero fights his way across the world. Socrates does none of these things. Right? He sits in a prison cell, argues carefully with his friends, drinks what he is given, and walks until his legs can carry him no further. In the figure of Socrates, laughing as the hemlock takes hold, completing a spiritual odyssey without ever leaving his city, Plato gave the Western tradition its most enduring image of what it means to live and to die philosophically. The examined life is worth living. And the man who examined his life most thoroughly met his death not with tears or rage or desperate flight, but with laughter.